Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode. Today we're taking a look at destruction point of view from Iron Juggernaut. The guy is in a heroic clearing guild up to Spalls at the moment, and he has 573 item level. But even if you're lower item level or higher, there might be something to learn from this. First off, I'll focus purely on the fight. After that, let's take a quick recap on the UI and how it can hurt you as a player. Alright, so the first thing we need to look at is the opener. I cannot tell you how important it is to get the opener right these days, since that's where we're bursting for millions, and if you fuck that up, you're already off to a very bad start. It's crucial to try to optimize and squeeze every bit of DPS out of it. As you can see here, he uses pre-pot, and right after that he uses Dark Soul. Since he's a bit out of position, he doesn't get to precast and incinerate, which we like to use to build some extra embers while the countdown is going on, so it's flying in the air while the boss is engaging. Now because he decides to use Dark Soul and then Doomguard, we're wasting 3 seconds of Dark Soul uptime and 4 seconds of potion uptime before hitting our first immolate. We do never wish to start our Dark Soul off before we cast our first spell. I always prefer to use the Dark Soul after the precasted incinerate and right before we apply the first immolate. You shouldn't put Dark Soul during the precasted incinerate since it's slow without speed increase from Conflagrate and without Lost and Meta Gem. Now his expanded mind procced a bit late, which is always a bad thing, but not as bad as for Affliction. Now if you watch my destruction open video, I mentioned how important it is that we fully focus on getting as many Chaos Balls out during the 10-second trinket timers and the 4-piece bonus proc. As you can see here, he's about to hit 2 embers but decides to cast 1 extra incinerate. That 1 extra incinerate can actually hurt us. Renewing immolate during 4-piece is fine, but we want our Chaos Balls out. Instead of doing the extra incinerate, then immolate and 2 Chaos Balls, I really recommend to do Chaos Ball, immolate, Chaos Ball, despite him doing the extra incinerate. If you stop the movie here at the end of the Chaos Ball cast, you can actually see that the timers of the 4-piece proc and the Toxic Totem trinket proc is at 0 seconds and have been for a while. Now I'll say that is squeezing your butt cheeks together in the hope of making it and cutting it way too close. This was probably more luck than timings, because we are milliseconds away from losing 15,000 intellect and 15% crit on that Chaos Bolt. Nevertheless he made it, so that was nail biting. Now after we have opened with the 4-piece proc on 2 Chaos Balls and renewed our immolate with it, the time has come where our 20-second duration buffs are still active, and the 10-second ones such as Meta Gem and Toxic Totem, Berserking, Blood Fury, Engineering Gloves have all ended. We still need to use that remaining time of Expanded Mind and Dark Soul together with the Bloodlust. Because he used Dark Soul early, it's already about to fade, and he didn't use his last 2 embers on Chaos Bolt before Dark Soul faded. Instead of casting Chaos Bolt, Incinerate, Chaos Bolt, he cast 3 straight Chaos Bolts. This can be bad if you have the time to delay a cast in between, because if the Chaos Bolt hit too fast after each other, you only get a total of 5 ticks from the Grimoire of Sacrifice dot, which should give you 3 ticks per Chaos Bolt. If you delay a cast between, you are 100% sure to get all 6 ticks. But the positive thing is that he does get out the 3 Chaos Bolts before Expanded Mind fades, instead of having leftovers for when cooldowns faded. Another bad thing you notice here at 38 seconds is he drops his immolate and he casts Incinerate after instead of renewing it. It doesn't hurt that much to cut it close on the Pandemic effect instead of having a tick or 2 lost. Pandemic effect allows us to renew immolate before it fades without losing tick time. It does update the snapshotting of procs on immolate, so overriding really powerful immolates with no procs is also a bad thing. But having immolate not ticking for around 2 ticks or more is also a huge loss versus renewing it closer to the last tick. Right after he cast Chaos Bolt with 1 Ember. Since Bloodlust and Meta Gem is active, he should probably have tried to focus on getting more Embers regenerating out of the haste. When we have haste procs, our cast becomes super fast, and it's a way better proc to use on regeneration versus casting Chaos Bolts with no procs at all. We know he's gonna proc the 4-piece 15% crit in about 1/3 of his Ember bar, so instead he should be spending the haste on regenerating from Incinerate and also save the Chaos Bolt for later or use the first one with the 4-piece proc. Because what ends up happening here is that he uses the haste for Chaos Bolts and ends up regenerating Embers without haste. He overrides the immolate we discussed previously, which had 2 haste procs running on it. Now he renews it right after 4-piece procs and with no haste at a way too early stage of the immolate. Since there's no proper timer, it's hard to say exactly how long is left, but I'd guess around 5 seconds or so. This is exactly the case when he should wait until it's about to fade, since he has no proc or renew it at least with the 4-piece proc. Next up, he casts a Chaos Bolt again with no procs. As we learned, this is really bad, because this time we have no haste procs. And since it's been a while since we saw a trinket proc, there's no reason to spend this ember just yet. He even gets the 4-piece proc right after he casted a Chaos Bolt from an immolate crit tick. So if he had waited, he would have gotten 15% crit, which increases Chaos Bolt damage, and you need to remember one 4-piece proc is half a Dark Soul, and Dark Soul is a 2-minute cooldown, so don't take such a proc for granted. What ends up happening is he gets into a bad cycle, because now you can see how he casts Chaos Bolt when he fills up the second ember when the 4-piece proc is still on an internal cooldown and can't be procced. So now he's using more embers at bad times instead of saving them up, and only fill Chaos Bolt on 4-piece proc if we reach higher ember counts. Now, because this is our downtime where we just spam Incinerate and we sit and waiting for procs, you should probably have 3 embers ready for any trinket proc. In this case, Toxic Totem. But this guy doesn't track it, so if we look up we can see it procs, and he's luckily trying to cast Immolate, and by randomness 4-piece proc is about to fade and he actually gets the Immolate rolling with both the crit buff and the Toxic Totem. This is a good thing because Immolate is nice to have running with 4-piece proc, since it's only critical strikes that generate embers. Now it's time. If we had 3 embers we could cast 3 Chaos Balls, and with Toxic Totem we have to cast them back to back most of the time with no haste, but instead he chooses to renew Immolate again, losing his 4-piece proc on it and only just renewing it with Toxic Totem, and he gets knocked on Chaos Bolt. What could have potentially been 3 casts of 15,000 intellect Chaos Balls and Immolate running with 15,000 intellect and 15% crit now turned into 1 Chaos Bolt with Toxic Totem and 1 Immolate with 15% crit. Now it doesn't take much math to figure out that's a big loss when every bit of your DPS counts. Next up is we're about to hit 2 embers again, and 4-piece proc with Toxic Totem proccing as well. He gets a good Immolate up with the Toxic and the 4-piece proc, and a straight Chaos Bolt with both. This is exactly how to optimize the procs, but again I'd like to see a cast between the Chaos Bolts back to back just for safety, since we don't have 3 embers anyway to cast 3 Chaos Bolts during the Toxic Totem. If he would fill a spell between, we would be sure to get the 6 ticks instead of maybe 5. Here he's doing something bad again. The Immolate with a lot of time left on it is getting renewed with absolutely nothing. This is again where you end up hurting your DPS insanely. There was no reason to renew that Immolate. Try to keep that in mind, because losing such powerful procs on an Immolate just to renew it with nothing is really bad. Alright, we're about to go into another scenario I want to emphasize. When your Dark Soul is about 20 to 30 seconds away or so, we know that Expanded Mind is about to proc as well, because it has a 115 seconds internal cooldown. That means we always line up Expanded Mind proc together with Dark Soul. Now this is a good burst opportunity, and it's where you always want to start saving up embers, because it's a moment where we can rely on actually being able to spend embers. Now he's using Chaos Bolt straight off 1 ember again, with no 4-piece proc. Instead he should be building up embers. Even if Toxic proc right now, I'd recommend that you only use a few embers, so you can still regenerate at least around having close to 3 embers when you're about to hit the cooldowns. What ends up happening here is that he overwrites another Immolate way too early, and he uses another Chaos Bolt right before the Dark Soul hits off cooldown, giving us a grand total of 1 ember when we hit Dark Soul off cooldown. Luckily the Expanded Mind didn't proc instantly, which can happen since it's a shit annoying trinket. If this was a normal scenario, this would actually save him a bit, because he used the embers right before Dark Soul. Also, in a normal scenario, always make sure you use your Dark Soul together when your Expanded Mind procs. We do this because we don't want to unsync them. We want to make sure that we always have Dark Soul off cooldown and ready to be used as soon as Expanded Mind procs, and Expanded Mind can be delayed sometimes because it doesn't instantly proc. But since his guild uses a different tactic, it sort of hurts DPS because he goes back and stands still, but had this been a normal boss kill without this tactic, always make sure you line up the Expanded Mind with the Dark Soul. If he had a bit more luck and it would proc faster, he could have made Dark Soul plus Expanded Mind lining up and nuking with a bunch of Chaos Balls. So since Pawn is doing this tactic, let's take a look at what he could have done in this scenario. At 2-5, Dark Soul comes off cooldown, and spoiler alert, since the boss dies at 5 minutes and 14 seconds, which means you could have a total of 2 Dark Souls left because of the 2-minute cooldown, we could have used them both instantly. In case you're doing the fight this way, he should have simply used the Dark Souls on cooldown before they got knocked off, hoping that Expanded Mind would proc. That way he would actually have gained 1 extra Dark Soul, and on top of that he could have delayed the last Dark Soul until the last Expanded Mind proc. That's damage control, but what ends up happening is he only gains 1 Dark Soul, which he uses when he goes back to the boss with 4 embers, and he doesn't get another Dark Soul before the fight ends because of it, losing not only a full Dark Soul but the option to use it together with Expanded Mind the next time. he could have instantly used Dark Soul and still have gotten the 3 Chaos Balls off, 2 with Dark Soul alone and 1 with Dark Soul and Expanded Mind if he did damage control use of the cooldowns. When he goes back, there's no need to panic and use all 4 embers at once. When you use 1 ember, you have spare room to use Conflag and get Immolate up. If you're at 4, just make sure you use a Chaos Ball, but always get Immolate and Conflagrate on cooldown. At least 1 Conflag, then get it to 2 stacks and cast Chaos Ball again. Because when the cooldown is a 20-second cooldown like Dark Soul, there's no rush to spend your embers back to back and neglecting everything else. Because what happens here is that he gets lucky with a Toxic Totem proc, which he could have spent on 3 embers had he changed the priority at the start with using Immolates and Conflags. But we only got to do 2 Chaos Balls with it. After this, the same mistake starts to happen. Instead of renewing Immolate with 4Ps and Dark Soul before it fades, he ends up not having it up at all for some ticks and renews it with nothing. He gets some lucky Toxics which he executes okay, and right now it's just downtime because we have no cooldowns coming off and a very low chance for something to proc with 2 Toxic Totem procs in a row. Again, never use Chaos Ball with nothing if you can get it off with 4-piece proc. You especially shouldn't even think about using it with nothing before you hit 3 embers and above. Now we're about to hit Execute. Execute is a bit tricky. Should I use Shadowburn or should I use Chaos Ball? I always try to use both. For example, if you have haste procs and other procs in general, always try to Chaos Ball. But let's say you know you won't make the Chaos Ball cast time before procs fade, you can easily fill with Shadowburn. Shadowburn is only good if it crits. If it doesn't crit, it does shit damage compared to Chaos Ball. Chaos Ball scales with all procs, while Shadowburn is sort of shit with the meta gem proc and haste stat. So for example, if we have 3 embers and you can only make 2 Chaos Balls on a 10-second trinket proc for some reason, you just fill with Shadowburn for the 3rd. Else I'd recommend to just use Shadowburn if you are close to capping on embers with no procs around the 4-piece proc, just like we do with Chaos Ball. He does get a nice Expanded Mind proc. You should always potion during a fight if you have Expanded Mind, Dark Soul and a Toxic Totem on top of each other, but else just use your potion during the execute or such, or with your last Dark Soul plus Expanded Mind proc. In this case he could have used his potion with Expanded Mind because we won't make another Dark Soul and Expanded Mind has more value as a proc than Dark Soul. He does use his embers which is good, but he should be casting Chaos Ball, not Shadow Burning fully at this point, and the potion he used was just way too late with no use. As you can see, a short fight like this can contain a lot of mistakes. I hope you got something out of it, and every player does different mistakes. In this case the main issue lied around using embers too fast, while others may use them too slow, and his Immolate management wasn't up to speed and cooldown use wasn't done properly either for the fight. He did know how trinket proc should be used. He messed it up a few times but had the idea right. Now before we end, I also wanted to point out on some UI flaws, which would help him a lot. First of all, having cooldown timers being shown as shadow icons are really not optimal. You want a text saying seconds left before Dark Soul is about to be off cooldown, or the text timer on how long Toxic Totem is left. You want to track every trinket proc with exact timers on them, 4-piece proc, meta gem and everything possible like that. You need to put it as close to your eyes so you can focus on the game while getting told the information needed and not having to look up at random corners and places to find it. Reaction is everything. Also, I always recommend to get rid of any unneeded information that takes our eyes' attention. If you look at healing combat text, it's not something we really need and it spams the middle of your screen with useless numbers. Damage numbers on the side should be either put further away or removed. There's no point to see what you hit or get healed except above a target. If you want it for fun of it, put it further away so it's not distracting your view. The only numbers we want is the numbers on procs and timers on cooldowns, and timers on how long until cooldowns. Tracking your ICD trinket is a good idea as well, despite it being paired up with Dark Soul. Now thanks for watching this episode. Let me know if you would like to see more of it and what you thought. As I said, I hope it helped some people out there at least.